Welcome back to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I'm Glenn Caruso, head football coach at the University of St. Thomas, and so happy you tuned in. My dad was the single greatest man I ever met. He used to tell me, Glenn, I'm not going to tell you how to be a man. I'm going to be a man. I'm going to let you watch me, and you're welcome. That always struck me very deeply. My dad never intended to try and make my path easy or smooth or devoid of any hurdles. He understood that very strain and struggle was part of the journey that's going to make every one of us into the person that we're intended to be. I would encourage everybody to think when they're leading people that our job is to prepare the child for the path and not the path for the child. And remember, if we're doing it right, we're coaching football for life.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Coach Bill Curry. Coach Curry is a former head coach at Georgia Tech, Alabama, Kentucky, and he helped start the program at Georgia State. Greetings, Coach. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Ty. Thank you.
I appreciate you being on today, Coach. There's a lot going on here in our country and around the world in terms of the pandemic. There are protests all over, and I couldn't think of anybody better to talk to other than you. Of course, saw a little more of your background. You played center in the NFL, winning multiple NFL championships. You worked in the press for a while in terms of talking about things that are important relative to the game of football and to sports. And you wrote a book called 10 Men You Meet in the Huddle, which is a lesson on coming together as a people. And one thing you've mentioned to me is that you were mentored by Andrew Young, the great civil rights leader, when you became a head coach at Georgia Tech. I kind of wanted to get you on to talk about a couple of things. One being you are unafraid to express yourself, whether it be by social media or when you're speaking to gatherings or speaking to people, and you express yourself in opinions on race and human nature, and it usually has its ties to the game of football. I wonder if you can expound on that for us. Please.
Well, I was the luckiest guy in the world in that I grew up in the South with Jim Crow laws and blatant racism. And when we heard about racism, it was usually with the finger pointed at us, that we were the racists living in the South. Then when I moved north, I found out racism was plentiful in the North. And then when I went to California, I found out there was plenty of racism in California. I was shocked at both of those lessons that I learned the hard way. But I was incredibly blessed to be surrounded by some of the greatest men who, in the first instance, as you mentioned, they were mostly football people, whether it was Vince Lombardi. I was drafted by the Green Bay Packers. You walk in the Packer locker room, and I was supposed to not like him because he was a Yankee, he was Italian, he was Catholic, and we weren't supposed to like those people. We weren't supposed to be judgmental either. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant males run around claiming that we're the least judgmental people in the world, when in fact, we are the most judgmental folks in the history of the world. And I had already decided that I didn't like Lombardi, but Lombardi had a great attribute that he doesn't get credit for. He would not tolerate racism. So here he is coaching what has been called by many the greatest team in the history of football. And the one thing you better learn the day you walk in there is nothing racist escapes your lips, or you're on the next Greyhound heading home. So that was a great lesson to me. And then to encounter leaders like Willie Davis, who was our defensive captain, who was working on his master's degree in business at the University of Chicago after graduating from Grambling State. And I thought, he's going to see me, hear my Southern accent, and run me off. He didn't do that. He embraced me. He loved me. He taught me how to practice, how to behave. He said, when you don't think you can take it, come find me. I'll get you through it. So what did the great man do for the terrified white kid? He didn't just help me play in the NFL for 10 years. He changed my life. Then I go to the Baltimore Colts, and the very first year I'm there, a guy comes up and befriends me. His name is John Mackey, and he's considered by most football experts to be the greatest tight end in the history of the game. By the way, Willie and John are both in the NFL Hall of Fame, but they're in my Hall of Fame because they knew how to love a terrified white kid from College Park, Georgia, and not just to be nice to me, but to bring me along, to make me think about things that I really didn't want to think about. John said, "You're going to be my associate." He was our Players Association representative. Then he was elected president of the NFL Players. And then he came into my room one day and shut the door and said, "You're going to be the next president." I said, "No, I'm not." Yeah, well, I lost that argument. So I ended up following John Mackey into that role, and once again had my life changed by a great, great man. We no longer have John or Willie, but Sylvia Mackey sits on the board of my wife's Foundation for Women, and she still comes and stays with us. And that's a lifelong bond that wouldn't have happened any other way except for football. So a guy from Grambling State University, a guy from Syracuse University, both of whom are African American, both of whom are Hall of Famers, befriend a guy who's never going to come close to the Hall of Fame, there's nothing in it for them except to help me to see what can happen in the huddle. And I've tried to teach that every single day since then to every team I ever coach. So then I go to coach at Georgia Tech, and I'm very inexperienced. And in walks one of the most famous human beings on earth, unannounced. I didn't invite Andrew Young to come to my office. I wouldn't have had the audacity. He just walks in. I said, "Oh my gosh, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Congressman, Mr. Civil Rights, I'm not sure what to call you." He said, "Andy, how about Andy? Just call me Andy." He said, "Now, let me just tell you what I am, what I really am. I'm a youth worker, and I'm going to help you." I said, "Well, why would you help me?" He said, "Aren't you going to make these guys go to class? I mean, aren't they going to graduate? Aren't they going to come back and be contributors to the community? Aren't they going to be good husbands and fathers?" I said, "Yes, sir. I promise you those things." He said, "We're going to have a good football team." I said, "I promise you that too." He said, "Okay, I'm going to help you." And he helped me every day while I was coaching at Georgia Tech. Then he helped me every day while I coached at Georgia State. And if I want to call him, I can get through to him anytime I want to ask him the most ridiculous questions. You wouldn't believe the stuff I've asked him, but he's got such wisdom for all the obvious reasons. And he's been kind enough, again, to share. So much of what's happened to me is a God thing. I've just been blessed with the presence of great, great human beings. And there are many more, but those are the ones that have made the biggest difference.
Right. Well, like you, I'm a fan of football, and I always say, I give this story about the game. The crowd cheers because a receiver caught a touchdown. Well, if you work backwards, the crowd wouldn't cheer if that receiver didn't catch the touchdown. The receiver wouldn't have caught that touchdown if the quarterback didn't throw it to him. The quarterback wouldn't have thrown it to that receiver if the offensive line didn't block for him. And the offensive line wouldn't know how to block if the coaches didn't teach them how. So everybody in football is needed to make a successful play, a successful game, and a successful team. And you talk about that in the huddle, and you talk about that in the story you just gave us in terms of what's important when you talk about inclusiveness and diversity and everybody contributing to a greater cause. The things we see now out there, people expressing frustration because of things that have been happening in this country for decades and decades, and even probably you can even say hundreds of years, are continuing to happen. And we see frustration from people, I guess, which for some people is a reaction to violence they've seen on a video. And when I think about that, I heard Martin Luther King say one time, what happened in the 60s, the 70s, and civil rights movement, a lot of it was people's reaction to violence they saw on TV during peaceful protests, right? The protests were peaceful, but the peaceful protests were met with violence. It was on TV and people reacted to that. But there was an underlying greater cause. After the reaction to the violence and whatever action took place after that took place, there were still things that needed to be addressed, but weren't addressed because instead of reacting, people weren't necessarily moved to act. I wonder about your thoughts on that. You played during the time of the civil rights movement, and you've been in a leadership role in terms of dealing with a number of things that have happened while you were coaching, while you worked in the media, even while you were playing. So I just wonder your thoughts on some of the things that are going on now and essentially just words of wisdom for a lot of us who have dealt with some of the things we see.
Well, I wish I were wise. I would be happy to dispense words of wisdom. There was a time when I thought I was pretty wise and pretty cool, and I've learned as time has passed just how limited my perspective is, and I'm being re-educated because I really thought that we would attack racism and that we would. You're never going to eliminate personal bias because it's just a part of the human creature. But to have such blatant things happen with our police departments, and to have them still happening, and to have them such that a whole group of people, African American and white, and all different shades, we all feel compelled. We got to do something. We got to demonstrate. We got to raise the roof here. And so, if there is a wisdom, if I have learned, and I learned this from Andy Young, it is that black power may not work, white power may not work, green power works. When the establishment is threatened so that the money is being attacked, then things happen. Legislation happens, police departments are changed, people are prosecuted who ought to be prosecuted, and they're sent away like they're supposed to be sent away, like anyone else would be sent away under different circumstances. And that's a sort of a wounded answer, but I can't think of anything else to do. You got to attack those pocketbooks.
Right. The bottom line. Attack the bottom line and things start to happen. I understand that, Coach. I understand that. You played with and coached with a number of guys such as myself. There are, if somebody was to take a poll of the audience I work with now are college athletic administrators. In the past, I worked with football coaches. And obviously I work with all human beings. But if you take a poll of the people who work in college athletics, of the black men who work in college athletics, you would find that a lot of us have been put in handcuffs, have had police guns drawn on us, have been arrested and put into the car and embarrassed in front of neighbors and other people, myself included. And we've dealt with those things. I wonder, in your experience, whether it be as a head coach or as a player and talking to some of the African-American men, such as myself, how have they expressed those feelings? Because you can give a broad perspective of talking to somebody in the 70s, talking to somebody as a coach in the 80s, as a coach in the 90s, somebody who worked in the media, and as a coach as recent as 2012 in terms of some of the things you've heard from young African-American men in terms of either police brutality or underlying racism.
Well, going back a long way, I experienced, of course, I've been pulled over for speeding or running. I've been pulled over a couple of times a long, long time ago when I should have been locked up, and I wasn't. And I guarantee you, if I had different pigmentation, I would have been. Some of my bigger mistakes, I went scot-free from the police, and I shouldn't have. And we all knew it. There were a bunch of other guys in the car too. And I remember that vividly. I will not say where that was or when, but I also had the experience of being in a car with two African-American teammates, and I was a passenger. And we were pulled over, and I mean, with unceremoniously, we were removed from the car immediately, get out of the car. And when I got out of the car, I looked into the muzzle of a 357 Magnum or a 45 or whatever it was he was carrying. And it's the only time in my life I've ever been held at gunpoint. And we had done nothing except to be driving while black. You can imagine that my two teammates were just livid. We were ticketed for a nothing violation. But I found out what it felt like, and I don't know how many white guys get the privilege of seeing how that feels, of being in a car when that actually happens and nobody has done anything wrong. And then I see that Dr. Lewis Gates is trying to go to his own home, and he gets nabbed. That should have been enough to wake us up, and that was several years ago. So, I mean, I'm watching and listening, and I'm realizing the progress that I sort of assumed, and I've worked hard in one respect with my players, and I had the privilege of being responsible for 105 teenage males in the heart of downtown Atlanta or Tuscaloosa or Lexington, Kentucky. And that's a tall order. They're going to test you 1,000 different ways. And that we had the privilege of bringing the police in to talk to them, both African American and white, to talk to our guys about this is what you do, this is what you don't do. And I thought I was doing enough, and clearly I was not. And I was not addressing the right entity. I should have been down at the police department asking for a meeting with all of them, saying, look here, here's how you treat a 19-year-old who just came off the streets of LA and he's in Atlanta because he wants to go to college and play football. Let me just beg you, if he gives you any lip, call me. I didn't do that. There are a lot of things I can think of that I could have done. So I've had a PhD in learning what to do and what not to do. One of the best things that happened to me through the years as a head coach was to have African American parents to walk into my office and shut the door and say, Coach, we need a couple of hours of your time. That was really productive. That helped me understand some things that I wouldn't have understood otherwise for how it feels to be an African American parent. So I had a lot of advantages. I could have done more, and I wish I had. I did the best I could with what I had.
Right. And I'm sure the guys who played for you appreciate it. It's interesting. You talk about, we call it the talk, right? My mother sat me down and said, the police pull you over, or be careful what you're out there doing. Had to tell my nephew when he was living with me here in Waco and got his driver's license on, hey, look, make sure your insurance card is visually reachable so you don't reach for anything. I mean, there's a number of things that you deal with, in the African American community, and you have experienced some of that, right, when you were with your teammates and they were driving. I want to talk about one other thing, that the reaction, like I mentioned, reaction versus acting, reaction to a police brutality, reaction to what they see as violence against an African American man on a video allows the police and the people in authority to be the target of frustration. But there's something bigger here. When we come to the realization that people in this country know that they have the ability to weaponize a call to the police against someone who's African American, means that the problem is bigger than just the police. It means that people in the country do understand the state of race in our country. And I'm referring to the video where the woman called the police against the guy in the park. She inherently understood how race works, and inherently understood how power dynamics works in the police work and the authority. That target, for her, she's not a cop, right? So the frustration is beyond just police here in our country. And I hope that people understand that it's beyond just pointing the finger at police in our country.
Well, that tape you're talking about was a revelation, because not only was she armed with that knowledge that she could weaponize, I'm not sure you used the word in that context of that conversation, but she knew the dog whistle. She knew the words that would get the police there quickly. This is an African American man threatening my life. That I have not thought about that, and I should have. That was devastating. You knew what she was doing, and fortunately, the guy really was brilliant. He was brilliant the way he handled it. Please do. Please call the police. Please do. And he's forgiven her. But he said, I haven't forgotten what that felt like, and nor should we forget it. He came out of it beautifully, but he could, if he had bolted and run, any of the things that are normal human responses, or if he had stepped toward her or started toward her, anything other than what he did, it could have been very different. I wish I had an answer. I don't. You're right. It's way deeper than the police departments, and it's all through all of us.
I don't think many of us have answers ourselves, but when people aren't afraid to talk about it, or people aren't afraid to say what's on their mind, as you do, as I've watched you and gotten to know you over the last 10 to 15 years from working with the Football Coaches Association, it makes a lot of us feel like, hey, we're not in this on our own, because leaders such as you, Coach Curry, and a lot of other leaders you worked with and I've worked with understand it and go beyond saying things that protect their position, right? Making statements that, for the lack of a better word, could be said at a Sunday afternoon picnic, but aren't specific to what's exactly happening in our country today. I appreciate you coming and joining me here to have this discussion on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Well, I think that's probably, thank you for that. That's probably the result of Dr. Andrew Young's work with me, because even though I have erred in so many ways, I couldn't watch him without learning exactly how deep these feelings run in how many directions. The first day he became mayor, when he became mayor of Atlanta, I called him and I said, "Congratulations, man, this is great." He said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "The people that elected me are already picketing me." I said, "Well, you need to go calm them down." He said, "No, I can't do what they want me to do."
Yeah.
So, I mean, but listening to the people and understanding that it goes way beyond teams or police departments. That was a Ty Brown moment. I needed this conversation this morning.
I appreciate it, Coach. And also what it helps me understand is, sports has always been on the forefront of things in this country, and sports has been gone for the last few months. And look what at a bird's eye view, right? And I say this jokingly, but sports have been gone for the last few months, and look at the state we're in as a country now. So a lot of things are interesting when you look at a whole bunch of different perspectives on where we are, Coach. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Podcast.
Well, anytime I can do anything to help you, I'll do it.
That was Coach Bill Curry. He's the former head coach at Georgia Tech, Alabama, Kentucky, and Georgia State. And of course, he played in the NFL, winning multiple NFL championships, and also the author of a great book called 10 Men You Meet in a Huddle. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.